Hello everyone. So sorry for the wait, but I think in the end you will believe me when I say it was worth it. As some of you may know, I'm currently in the middle of publishing a novel. Look forward to more news about that very soon. While I was away though, a lot has happened. First off, we passed 1,000 subscribers. That is truly incredible. Thank you to everyone, from the very first commenters on my channel to the person who pushed us past the 1K mark. I know this might sound crazy, but for the first time in my life, people are consistently asking me what I think about literature. People ask me for book recommendations or ideas, or want to hear me read to them, and that, I think, is all I've really wanted to do for a long time. I do have a pretty interesting title lined up for our next video essay deep dive, but to get back into the swing of things, I thought I would do a nice, easy short video introducing a few of the lesser-known books that I feel have changed how I viewed literature. I'll limit myself to 3 actual ones, and in an effort to not be boring, I've chosen a few books that I don't think get talked about enough. In a very real sense, though, the boring, more stereotypical stories are pretty important too, so I have a few honorable mentions that, while certainly influential, are a little too popular for me to include them in an intriguing video alone. So, I'll quickly acknowledge them here before starting. First off, The Brothers Karamazov is a text that I have already talked about in my video on perspective, and it truly is a masterpiece. This is a story so full of character and deep introspective psychology that when I eventually do get around to making a video about it in its entirety, it will be a long one. It is pretty commonly called the best novel ever written, and that might actually be true, but it is a little too well known for me to endorse in an interesting way. If you are at all familiar with scholarly criticism, you already know about Dostoevsky's magnum opus. Second, The Sound and the Fury is, in my opinion, and the opinion of many others, the best American novel ever published. It truly is one of a kind, and if you are at all interested in why Cormac McCarthy or Flannery O'Connor write the way that they do, then reading The Sound and the Fury, I think, will be one of the best decisions you will ever make. Faulkner's short stories are great too. Barn Burning and The Town are popular assignments in early schooling, and they are seldom done justice this way. Whether you view it as an American Ulysses or simply a criticism of the South from the South, The Sound and the Fury will set your mind afire with ideas. Finally, the last honorable mention is Albert Camus' The Stranger, the book that makes people readers. I vividly remember picking up my first copy of The Stranger from a Barnes & Noble before leaving on a long trip east. I must have been 16 or 17, and it's incredible how many other people I have met who share that experience. It's fantastic, and even if you don't believe in philosophy, the quiet power of The Stranger is sure to make you believe in literature again. Now, with the more common stories out of the way, let's get into some interesting sections of my literary journey. Cyane, mourning the rape of the goddess and the contempt for the sanctities of her fountain, nursed an inconsolable grief in her silent heart, and pined away wholly with sorrows. She melted into those waters, whose great goddess she had previously been. You might see her limbs becoming softened, her bones seeming pliant, her nails losing their hardness. First of all, the slenderest parts dissolve, her dusky hair, her fingers and toes, her feet and ankles, since it is no great transformation from fragile limbs to cool waters. Next, her breast and back, shoulders and flanks slip away, vanishing into tenuous streams. At last, the water runs in her ruined veins, and nothing remains that you could touch. First up, I have a confession to make. I have an aversion to classical Greek and Roman poetry. I know. I even talked about Homer in my Berserk video, but it's true. Gorgias was the only assigned text in college that I did not finish. Plato is one of my least favorite authors to read, but there is an exception. Metamorphoses by Ovid is one of the most beautiful texts I have ever read. It's a long-form Latin narrative poem that encompasses numerous mythic tales in Roman and Greek folklore. It starts, well, at the beginning of the world, and from there blossoms into many, many tales of power, loss, wrath, anger, and above all, transformation. Almost every story in the poem depicts some radical form of alteration, whether it's Athena transforming Arachne out of jealousy into the horrifying image of a spider, or Cyane melting into the water around her. Ovid's masterpiece is a stunning testament to how all things must change. Even the world, even the gods. Because it was written in Latin, its poetic form is easier to translate into English, and it remains a stunning piece of ancient poetry to this day. To put this in perspective, Ovid finished his magnum opus in 4 AD, decades before the first books of the New Testament were put to paper. If you ever wonder why we know so much about Greek and Roman myth, Ovid is probably the answer. But the realization that really made me think differently about literature was that Ovid wasn't really writing about transformation. You see, in the end, scholars have recognized that the most uniting factor in Ovid's stories is love. In a very human way, Ovid flips the preconceived notion of power on its head. Instead of viewing humanity as a plaything for the gods, Ovid argues that human love is more powerful than any divine intervention. In the end, Prometheus's mistake has become greater than the gods themselves. We have metamorphosized into powerful beings capable of controlling our own fate, and these passions we hold dear are the catalyst of that power. A book is more than a verbal structure or series of verbal structures. It is the dialogue it establishes with its reader, and the intonation it imposes upon his voice, and the changing and durable images it leaves in his memory. A book is not an isolated being, it is a relationship, an axis of innumerable relationships. For my second book, let's go to a text I recommend a lot. Occasionally in my comments, viewers will ask me what books I would recommend to a person who wants to start viewing books in a more literary sense. My answer has seldom changed. The Collected Fictions of Jorge Luis Borges is a masterclass in the power of the short story. Borges, who today is famous for bringing literary theory out of the universities and into the public eye, has one of the most powerful and vivid styles I have ever read. What some authors take hundreds of pages to tell, Borges accomplishes in 10. His style is so effective that it birthed its own name, Borgesian brevity, and its legacy can be seen through other incredible works of art, like Italo Calvino's Invisible Cities, and even the works of North American authors like John Barth and David Foster Wallace. You might know him from his famous short story, The Library of Babel, where Borges pictures a world that is one impossibly large library. Inside the library exist countless identical rooms, each with shelves filled with similarly bound books. These books contain everything. Each book is a random permutation of words and symbols. The narrator says that, in fact, there exists every permutation of these symbols in the library. In short, the library contains every possible book. This includes everything that has been written, will be written, or could be written. Everything is there, but it is hidden in an almost unimaginable amount of gibberish, millions, billions, trillions of texts of just pure nonsense surround the library's inhabitants. One of the most powerful passages that I will never forget is when the narrator describes a character searching his life for meaning in the books, and after years upon years of reading, he found a book that is still 99% nonsense, but ends with the words, O tiempo, tus piramides. O time, thy pyramids. I still remember at the time being amazed at the inventiveness of this sentence. Think about writing this part of the story and knowing that you needed to craft a sentence that almost means something. I don't know if I could have come up with a sentence better than "O time, thy pyramids." Reading the Library of Babel as a parable for how philosophy and religion wrestle with the concept of infinity is an incredibly rewarding and effective exercise in critical reading, and I would not be where I am today in the literary realm without this text. His essays on literary theory are also unmatched for their clarity and control. Alright, number 3. If I were to tell you that I was about to show you a classic American novel that changed how I viewed literature, you might guess that I would show you a Steinbeck novel I read in high school. Maybe you envision something by Joyce Carol Oates if you're more of a modern kind of reader. If you watched my video on Blood Meridian, you might guess As I Lay Dying by Faulkner, or perhaps even Suttree. All of these would be good and accurate guesses. To some extent, these authors have all affected me deeply, but the one I chose is quite different, and I really have saved the most interesting for last. He felt his hunger no longer as a pain, but as a tide. He felt it rising in himself through time and darkness, rising through the centuries, and he knew that it rose in a line of men whose lives were chosen to sustain it, who would wander in the world, strangers from that violent country where the silence is never broken except to shout the truth. He felt it building from the blood of Abel to his own, rising and spreading in the night. A red gold tree of fire ascended, as if it would consume the darkness in one tremendous burst of flame. The boy's breath went out to meet it. He knew that this was the fire that had encircled Daniel, that had raised Elijah from the earth, that had spoken to Moses and would in the instant speak to him. He threw himself to the ground, and with his face against the dirt of the grave, he heard the command. Go warn the children of God of the terrible speed of mercy. The words were as silent as seeds, opening one at a time in his blood. The Violent Bear It Away is one of the last novels Flannery O'Connor ever wrote before her death at just 39. Some of you might be familiar with my characterization of Cormac McCarthy's writing. In my video on The Judge, I called his style brutalist, but McCarthy is, in my opinion, not the originator of the brutalist style. As vivid and special as Outer Dark, Blood Meridian, and The Road are, that title goes, at least in my view, to O'Connor. And truly what a thing to behold this book is. From the incredibly raw ideas that grew out of the Deep South comes forth a novel so fascinating, I struggle to describe just how influential it has been to me. The story describes the complicated and semi-abusive relationship between a man and his great-uncle. The latter kidnapped the boy from his father when he was young in order to baptize him against his father's wishes, and from that day on became his forceful caretaker. The young man resents his great-uncle, and after his death, even refuses to bury him like he wished. But the seeds of religion grow slow, and eventually the man realizes that the influence of his uncle's Catholic dominance never really went away. Something pulses within him, a deep religious zealotry that threatens to consume his life and the lives of those around him. The language is beautiful and horrible, violent and bright. O'Connor describes the vicious blackness of the night's silence with the same fervor and energy as the flames of the uncle's funeral pyre. And being American myself, I realized I feel that pulse too. There is something that I have inherited, something deeply rooted in the culture of my country that I will probably never be rid of. And O'Connor was the first author to make me realize that. Alright. As always, both the titles and the editions I used in this video will be in the video description, so you can pick them up if you so wish. Thank you again for being patient with me as I struggle through the difficult, slow, but ultimately rewarding process of publishing a book. And Of course, thanks again for 1,000 subscribers. Let's keep going.